it. You feel their bravery rush into your own heart. You got it? If there is such a thing as ancestral and intergenerational trauma, then I believe there is such a thing as intergenerational ancestral wisdom. This ancestor has something that they have been longing to tell you, something that you need to be brave with your life in this moment. Can you hear it? I invite you to take your cupped hands and just whisper what it is that you heard into your palms. And if you didn't hear anything, just a feeling, just let it be a deep breath. Now I invite you to hold this wisdom in your hands as if it's like shimmery golden wisdom. Can you feel that? And now I invite you to take those palms and press them into your heart and take a deep inhale. Let it come. Let it go and let that wisdom just course through your whole nervous system. Good. This is how we are going to make it through this time of terror and transition, with our ancestors at our backs and their wisdom in our hearts, and linking arms in solidarity with one another. I want to share with you the ancestor who I conjured. You heard him mentioned earlier. It's my grandfather, Kaur Singh. He arrived in California in 1913, and immigration officials took one look at him and threw him behind bars at Angel Island. We know that Ellis Island on the East Coast was a symbol of welcome for European immigrants, but Angel Island was a symbol of exclusion and of hate, a place where white nationalist zeal meant they were trying to deport as many of us as possible. My grandfather was interrogated and incarcerated behind bars for months with Chinese immigrants, Japanese immigrants, Filipino immigrants. I wonder what conversations they had, what looks they had to give each other, the way that they had to lock arms just to make it through those squalid conditions. My grandfather was released on Christmas Eve, 1913, and I have to believe that something that he experienced behind those bars taught him what solidarity could look like. Because years later, when his Japanese American neighbors were rounded up and taken to concentration camps during World War II, my grandfather looked after their farms so that they would have a home to return to. He went to visit them when no one else would. You see, my grandfather was just a simple farmer, but he taught me what ancestral solidarity looked like. And his generation, he linked arms with Chinese, Filipino, Japanese Americans to fight for decades for the rights to become citizens, the ability to vote. And do you know that he never missed an election? Even when he was in his 90s. Imagine this old, frail, turbaned, bearded grandfather, so frail that my father had to carry him to the polls, but he never missed an election because the right to vote was always sacred in our family. Everything that our ancestors fought for, a world of dignity, of equality, of justice, our democracy, is at stake with this election. I sometimes wonder what would my grandfather think if he could look down at me in the year 2020? What would he think witnessing a pandemic that, we should have learned from the pandemic that he survived? In 1918, he survived the Spanish flu, but it seemed like our country learned nothing from that as we are witnessing 210,000 lives lost disproportionately. Brown people, Black people, Indigenous people. Lives we could have saved had we had willing leadership. What would our ancestors think? What would my grandfather think when he saw 5 million acres of land burning in California, the state that he made home? The woods that my father played in, the woods that I played in as a child, those woods are gone. The cabin we spent our childhood in is gone. And I look at my son and I think scorched earth cannot be the world that we leave our children. What would our ancestors think when they witnessed American democracy and free and fair elections held through world wars, through atrocities of all kinds, and now in 2020, the greatest threat to democracy in America, a fair and free election, is the president himself? What would they think? What would they think when they saw, if they had seen the video of George Floyd gasping for breath under the knee of an officer? Would their eyes have floated over like mine did to the Asian American officer standing next to the white officer, Officer Thao? He was doing his job. He was following the script. He doesn't have blood on his hands, and yet, how many times have we been like Officer Thao, just doing the right thing, keeping our head down, not making waves, as the Black people in our lives are gasping for breath, either from police violence or state violence or a deadly virus? What would they think? You know, about a week after George Floyd's murder, my neighborhood, like many neighborhoods in Los Angeles, became militarized. Helicopters shaking the house day and night, popping sounds in the distance, assault vehicles and assault rifles in the street around my son's preschool, and we couldn't leave the house. I wanted to protect my brown children. And when we finally got in the car, I was with my 5-year-old son and my 1-year-old daughter, and my son was looking out the window and he was going to see the rifles. He was going to see the rifles, and I thought, that's it. That's it. I would have to explain it all to him now. I would have to explain to my son the torch-bearing white supremacists and the hate violence and the police killings and the authoritarian assaults on our democracy, and the fact that his life is more in danger today than my grandfather's was when he arrived in this country 100 some years ago. How was I going to explain it all to him? He was finally going to see me cry. And I looked at my son's face and he had this look of awe. You see, he wasn't looking at the rifles. He was looking at these big pieces of plywood on storefronts and big, beautiful murals of Trayvon and Tamir and Brianna and George. And he had a look of wonder in his eyes. And he looked at me and said, "Mommy, did you do this?" Because he saw BLMs and hearts everywhere, and he knows that all that his mommy talks about day and night is revolutionary love. And I said, "No, Kavi, we did this. We did this. There are millions of people right now. You can't see them, but we're here. They're showing up. They're rising up. They're flooding the streets in our grief and our rage and fighting for justice and a global uprising for Black lives and racial solidarity that I never thought we would see in our lifetime. Millions of us linking arms together in a multiracial movement for justice that honors the ancestral solidarity that our ancestors taught us. You see, revolutionary love is when we are brave enough to see no stranger, to see each other as sisters and brothers, to look upon your face and say, "You are a part of me I do not yet know. So I must let your grief into my heart. I must let your story change me. I must be willing to fight for you when you are in harm's way." Revolutionary love is flooding the streets with that kind of conviction and still insisting on the humanity of our opponents. That's how we birth the world to come. That's how we make sure that we don't become what we are fighting. Our ancestors taught us that. Grace Lee Boggs taught us that. The greatest social reformers, my grandfather, the ancestors you conjured, they taught us that. And this brings me to you. This brings me to you. You are the community leaders. You are the artists and activists. You are the innovators. You are the healers. You are the ones who have not only the trauma of our ancestors in our bodies, but you have their wisdom flowing through your veins too. And that means you are the midwives in this time of great transition in our nation. Is this the darkness of the tomb? Or the darkness of the womb? Is our America not dead? What if our America as a nation still waiting to be born? Then we've got to breathe. And we've got to push. And you've got to hold on to that wisdom that your ancestors gave you and hold it on. Keep it in your heart. Let it put the next breath in your body so that you can link arms like they did and keep showing up. And this is why I am so proud to be here tonight. Because CAA has been doing it for 50-some years. They know how to do this. They've got it. We just got to be the wind at their backs. So whatever donation you were planning to make tonight, I ask you to double it. Double it. They need you. Your children need you right now. Because here's what I know to be true. You will be someone else's ancestor one day. You will be someone else's ancestor one day. They will close their eyes and they will summon you. And so what you do now, how you show up in 2020, how you get out the vote, how you use your voice, and how much you support CAA tonight matters. It determines whether they will inherit our grief and our trauma, or whether they will inherit our bravery. Let them inherit our revolutionary love. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Valarie, thank you so much. How that this is a lot to think about. I have one question that I would love to pose to Sin and Valarie. You know, what gives you the most hope about the future? I mean, I do like this imagery of imagining myself as someone's future ancestor, but you know, what gives you the most hope about the future?
Do you want to go first, my sister?
Sure. I'm still processing what you shared, really. You know, in this time of great darkness, and fear and uncertainty for so many members of our community, I have been completely inspired by the movement, by the ways in which our community has galvanized, how we have seen for not even during this time, but for decades, we have been trying to build meaningful, substantial partnerships that really are about advancing our communities. And this is the work that we are continuing to build on. Yes, vote. Get everyone else to vote. Vote, yes, on Proposition 16. But regardless of what happens, no matter who's in office, our community is going to create the change, and it will take time. But we have to imagine that it's going to be in our lifetime. And that's the sense of urgency that I see today that really drives me and inspires me.
I agree. I feel like I'm seeing glimpses of the America that is longing to be born. I'm seeing it in all of the ways that we are organizing and rising up together. I'm seeing it tonight in all of you. I mean, this is your first virtual fundraiser, right? We found a way. We found a way to do it, to still, despite every kind of barrier, despite the audio not working, you still landed your jokes. We're still issuing the calls to action. We're showcasing what solidarity looks like. There's nothing going to stop us. There's nothing that's going to stop us. And what really gives me joy is I have my ancestors at my back. I'm linking arms with my sisters and brothers and siblings, right, including all of you. And I have my children in front of me. And so I ask you to just think of the children in your life. Just picture their face for a moment. Just notice what that does to the body, right? There's a softening, there's a kind of joyfulness there. You know, on the last election night, it felt like the world was ending. And back in 2016, and my son tugged at my sleeve and said, "This time, Mommy?" And I said, "On a night like this? No way." Like, I wanted to dress for a funeral, not for a dance party. And my husband was like, "Your rules, you set every night." Because I like to lay down the rules for it. So he puts on the music. It's like, "Baby, you're a firework." And at first, I'm so miserable. I'm just like this. My son jumps into my arms and he starts squealing. And then he says, "Throw me up, Mommy." Boom, 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 even brighter than the moon, moon. So I throw him up and he's laughing and I'm laughing and he's dancing and I'm dancing. And we are dancing on election night.
Yeah.
And I felt like this sparkling energy in my body. And I was like, oh, this is what joy is. We're taught to feel guilty for having joy amidst the labor, amidst the suffering, on days as dark as this, right? But I have learned, I finally learned. And in the Sikh faith, it's called Chardikala, an ever-rising joy, even in the darkness, ever-rising high spirits, even in the midst of the labor. That joy returns us to everything that is good and beautiful and worth fighting for.
Love that.
Joy is our greatest act of moral resistance. So I ask you, how are you protecting your joy every day? And that's how it'll last.
I love that, Valarie. Oh my goodness. You know what's going to give me hope is if we hit our 25K goal.
Or more. I just
Or
asked everyone to double
25,888, you know. But anyway, before we move on, I just want to thank you again, Valarie, for sharing your spirit and your words. And you know, we had a chance to meet in a really great retreat space last year, and it just, who knew we would reconvene online.
I'm so grateful.
It's 2020. So thank you, Sin and Valarie, for your thoughts, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.